Today, we are making a big jump from nations and wars to the topic of cryptocurrencies. In the first episode, we'll take a look at Bitcoin to see when, how, and why it was created, and explain what we can expect from it today. I'm not an expert by any means, so this will be a brief overview of Bitcoin's history, but I'll also talk about what people seem to be thinking of when they turn to this asset. The concept of Bitcoin first appeared in a white paper back in October 2008, just as the great financial crisis was starting to develop. This was no coincidence. The alleged creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, whose identity is still not known, conceptualized a decentralized digital currency to bypass all banks and their centralized ledgers, mainly because these banks, who act as middlemen between savers and borrowers, have become too big and too powerful. Sure, banks provide essential financial services and trust in a world where complete strangers transact with each other on a daily basis. This makes the economy work and allows us to obtain products and services on a scale that was unimaginable before. However, their sheer size and influence also turned these banks into a liability. We are too dependent on them, and should some of them fail, the entire world economy can go down. Which is why governments have been pumping more and more money into the system, declaring many of these banks too big to fail, which didn't exactly lead to prudent decision-making. Nakamoto and like-minded individuals all around the world were looking for a decentralized alternative that would allow us to bypass this system and conduct transactions with strangers without the need for trust, at the same time saving the various fees that financial institutions charge. In this decentralized alternative, we simply cut out the middleman and rely on the network itself, which provides security and trust on a peer-to-peer basis. We are not necessarily replacing money as we know it, but by having these cryptocurrencies, we can exchange and transfer money more easily, hopefully at a lower cost. In the first few years of its existence, Bitcoin didn't generate a lot of interest. It was studied and then used by a relatively small group of tech geeks and people who had been looking for ways to reform the financial system. They believed that decentralization was the key. For them, this was not about getting rich. Most of them were not looking for financial gains. Nakamoto himself, who may be a single person or a group of developers, we just don't know, seems to have abandoned the project by mid-2010, so other early supporters had to take the lead. The network itself was working, although it was tiny. The first transaction took place in early 2009. A year later, one programmer, Laszlo Hanyecz, purchased 2 pizzas for 10,000 bitcoins, just to prove that spending bitcoins on real-life items made sense. Back then, he needed a willing partner who would pay with his credit card and who would then receive the bitcoins in return from Laszlo. Along with the first successes, vulnerabilities also emerged. The first major flaw was spotted in 2010. It made it possible to create large amounts of bitcoins with no effort. The bug was actually exploited, but then it was fixed, and the blockchain, which contains the list of all transactions, was forked, or split, at a previous entry, which wiped out any trace of the exploit and allowed all members of the network to simply disregard the bitcoins that were created and spend using the flaw. Whenever a fork takes place, the invalid or outdated branch is not continued. It will no longer appear in the chain of transactions. This is how the network protects itself against malicious acts. Of course, no system is perfect. Bitcoin has been criticized for playing a role in illegal financial transactions, money laundering, and tax avoidance, not to mention cybercrime and terrorism. Also, the amount of electricity the network consumes is enormous. This is required by the computers that perform complex calculations in order to mine new bitcoins add new transactions to the blockchain, and confirm the entries added by others. The peer-to-peer network is what replaces the trust provided by banks in a traditional centralized system. Here, the calculations themselves and the consensus of the servers that make up the network do the job. The majority of the network has to agree on each new transaction, which also makes it very difficult for others to take control and divert the process. Whenever a mistake or flaw is recognized, the blockchain can be forked, the erroneous or alternative branch can be left behind, and the blockchain continues with new entries that correspond to the opinion of the majority. This is also how alternative coins have been created. One example is Bitcoin Cash. In 2011, after the initial transactions, the first organizations like WikiLeaks started accepting Bitcoins, but other cryptocurrencies started to appear as well, based on the open source code that Nakamoto left behind. By that time, the first online exchange, where you could buy and sell Bitcoins, had already been set up, although allegations of fraud soon appeared as well. The next step was the founding of Mt. Gox, or Mt. Gox, or Magic the Gathering online exchange, which was sold in 2011, then ended up in a fiasco, losing lots of Bitcoins. Still, the process has begun, after idealists, dreamers, cypherpunks, and anarchists, entrepreneurs showed up on the scene, looking to profit from this new phenomenon. In 2012, the Bitcoin Foundation was created to facilitate development and protection of the code. Coinbase was also founded, it still exists today, while in 2013, a faulty update caused a split in the blockchain, which was rectified by reverting back to the previous version of the software and abandoning the new branch. The price of Bitcoin was now measured not in cents, but in US dollars, which was a huge step forward compared to 2009, when $1 was worth 1,309 Bitcoins. For the first time, a government seized Bitcoins. The founder of the online black market, Silk Road, where you could buy drugs, weapons, and other illegal items, was arrested. But soon, the first Bitcoin ATM was also launched in Vancouver, Canada, while the price of Bitcoin reached $1,000. Chinese authorities were already cautious. They prohibited all financial institutions from using Bitcoin, but this did not stop the new platform. In 2014, the first safe storage was opened in London. More businesses and organizations, like the Chicago Sun-Times, Newegg, Dell, and even Microsoft accepted Bitcoin for certain purchases. But this was followed by more bad news. The vice president of the Bitcoin Foundation was arrested. The price declined to $600, although the network kept growing, with more exchanges, payment processors, and supporters joining the cause. By 2015, Mt. Gox was gone. It was replaced by other exchanges. The Bitcoin price sank to $262, while the official Bitcoin currency symbol was finally adopted, and the real identity of Nakamoto was still being investigated. In the following 2 years, the adoption of Bitcoin grew. Japan declared that virtual currencies like Bitcoin were equal to real money, at least as a means of payment. A study appeared that claimed Bitcoin was no longer driven by illegal activities. The vast majority of transactions took place between legitimate enterprises. So the price once again reached $1,000, then jumped to $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, and finally almost reached $20,000 by the end of 2017. 2018 began with an investigation in South Korea, which caused the price to decline all the way to $7,000. By that time, so many Bitcoins were already mined that only 20% of the originally planned amount remained for production. This is one of the reasons why people expect the price to grow, as the number of Bitcoins to be made available is finite. At the same time, both Facebook and Google announced that promoting cryptos was now prohibited on their platforms. They were joined by Twitter, while the US Justice Department launched a new investigation regarding alleged trade manipulations. Not long after the 10th anniversary of Bitcoin, its price sank below $3,300. In 2019, a new growth cycle began. Bitcoin's price started to go up, reaching $8,000. When the pandemic began in early 2020, we saw a 50% decline in the price, but certain European stock exchanges soon accepted the first crypto-based products, which expanded the market. In October that year, even PayPal announced that it would allow the purchase and sale of Bitcoins on its own platform. Within a month, Bitcoin almost reached $20,000, and in 2021, El Salvador became the first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, alongside the US dollar. In April of that year, the first Canadian Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs were launched. By October, when the first US exchange-traded fund was finally launched, Bitcoin's price surpassed $66,000, only to lose half of its value by January 2022. Today, Bitcoin is widely accepted. Thousands of well-known organizations have adopted it, but this does not guarantee future availability or even price stability. China has already banned all crypto mining activities. The Central Bank of Russia proposed similar restrictions, although the price seems to follow anticipated fiscal and monetary measures that would be implemented by major central banks like the US Fed. Just like the stock market, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies like Ethereum go up and down depending on what market participants expect from central banks. More easing means more money pumped into the system, while tightening and rising interest rates serve as a warning. Most people want to know whether they should invest in Bitcoin. They are less interested in using it as a form of payment. While certain groups, like foreign workers, may prefer Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, paying for products and services with Bitcoin is not what people think about on a daily basis. There are still significant issues to solve. One example is the speed at which transactions are processed and confirmed. While with ordinary credit cards, the typical waiting time is just a few seconds, with Bitcoin, a transaction can take minutes based on network activity, the hash rate, and fees. Security is another major concern. The various online exchanges obviously cannot offer the same kind of security that we are accustomed to with large banks. Not to mention that if you happen to forget your private key, nobody can give you access to your wallet, so all your Bitcoins would be lost forever. I prefer not to give financial advice, especially here on a channel that focuses on history. Still, if you believe in the crypto future, and you can resist the urge to frequently change your positions, holding on to it for at least 3 to 5 years, you will probably profit from such an investment. Everything else should be regarded as speculation or, even worse, gambling. So never ever forget what is probably the best advice. Use money that you can afford to lose. When it comes to cryptocurrencies, your nerves will be tested a lot. In the next video, I plan to take a look at the history of Ethereum, the second largest cryptocurrency, which also offers interesting new opportunities. If you want to read a great book on the early period of Bitcoin, I'll put a link in the description. See you next time!